There are entire bodies of literature, training camps, pamphlets, organizations that teach people how to talk others into faith. There's nothing that does the reverse until now. This morning, I'll offer an action plan, a vision, and a strategy for talking people out of their faith. Over the course of this seminar today, I'll teach you how to deliver dialectical interventions designed to separate faith from its host. I call this street epistemology. This project matters. It matters because our ability to rationally deal with problems is under siege. Reason has been slapped around and faith is hurting us. Believing things on the basis of something other than evidence and reason causes people to misconstrue what's good for them, what's good for their communities. In the United States, for example, public policies driven by faith hurt people. Abstinence-only sex education, prohibitions against gay marriage, bans on death with dignity, corporal punishment in schools, failure to fund international family planning organizations, and promoting teaching creationism and other pseudosciences in our schools. These are a few of the many conclusions that are wrought by irrationality. I say enough. We have serious pressing concerns that need to be addressed, and the way to do this is through reason and rationality, not superstition, not pretending, and certainly not religion. We need to confront dangerous ideas and not cower to them. We need actionable tools to stop the spread of the faith virus. Today's talk comes from Chapter 4 of my forthcoming book from Pitchstone Press, A Manual for Creating Atheists. I'll argue that whether it's missionaries, parents at the PTA, or family members, you can and must turn these engagements into opportunities. Today, I'll show you how. We've all had experiences when faith creeps up in a conversation. When this happens to me, I feel like I've won the lottery. These are discussions. These discussions are opportunities to help those who've caught the faith virus move from unreason to reason. Street epistemology is an action plan for skeptical citizenship. It's a way to help people value reason and rationality and move away from superstition, pretending, and faith. Street epistemology is a way to help people align their beliefs with reality. So here's what I'll do today. I'll offer 9 general strategies that you can use next time you're having a discussion with someone of faith. The first thing I'll do is I'll offer a framework, a way to conceptualize these strategies, and then I'll go over the strategies one by one. I will say that this material is dense. There's no question about it. It may even be dry, but it's essential to understand when you start talking people out of faith and into reason. The core of the intervention is not about changing people's beliefs. It's about changing the way people form beliefs, hence the term epistemologist. This is the main idea of the whole talk. Everything else is just how to operationalize it, and I'll define these terms step by step. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. It's the only $2 word in the talk. It's how you know what you know, how people come to knowledge. How is it that people claim to know these things, these pretty fantastical, amazing things? That word will come up over and over in the talk today. Faith is an epistemology. Faith is a method that people use to come to knowledge. The faithful say that they know Jesus walked on water because they have faith that it's true. That's in Matthew 14. Their faith leads directly to their experience of claiming to know. The problem with this is that this method, faith, is unreliable and arbitrary. I define faith as belief without evidence or belief without sufficient evidence. This means that it's virtually impossible to prove a faith claim. No evidence is needed when someone claims to know something through faith. That's why we have multiple conflicting claims to truth from various faith traditions. For example, Muslims claim that Muhammad was the last prophet. Mormons claim that Joseph Smith was a prophet. Joseph Smith lived after Muhammad. They cannot both be correct. They can both be wrong, but they cannot both be correct. Normally, faith isn't looked at as an epistemology. That is, it's not looked at as an unreliable way of coming to knowledge. The vast majority of people see faith in a positive light. They see it as a commitment and a moral virtue. I'm arguing that we need to begin by thinking about faith as an epistemology, as a method people use to come to knowledge. Once we make this conceptual shift, then we can change people's beliefs by changing the way they come to knowledge. That's what someone means when they say they've lost their faith. It's not just that their beliefs have changed, but how they know things has changed. So street epistemology is a transition from talking about God or religion to talking about epistemology, how people know. The interventions used in street epistemology do not target conclusions that are drawn from faith propositions. For example, Jesus being born a virgin. Nor do they target morality or moral issues. For example, the Catholic prohibition on birth control. Nor do they target the community, temples, mosques, synagogues. Instead, street epistemology targets how people think they know what they claim to know. Once we do this, we're in the world of evidence and argument. That's where we want to be, at the adult table. We want to bring our interlocutors with us to the adult table. Let's sit down and figure this out. Tell me what you think straight out. Let's talk about this and how we know it. Short of this, it's back to the kids' table and back to make-believe land. Okay, here's a review of the strategies. You can begin to use these immediately to begin talking people out of their faith and into reason. The first two strategies are drawn from the literature on behavioral change, which I've used to inform my own research with disaffected populations in the prisons. Specifically, strategies 1 and 2 focus on changing the behavior of people who are not interested in having their behavior changed. Strategies 1 and 2 are grounded in the peer-reviewed literature about how to reach the unmotivated and disaffected. I've drawn upon this body of research when teaching prison inmates and when engaging people of faith. Meet people where they are. Meeting people where they are is a term that comes from motivational interviewing. It's a technique for behavioral change. It draws from this line of literature called the Transtheoretical model of change. Here's the basic idea. The basic idea is that people go through stages of change. The last speaker said that people don't just become atheists. That's right. They go through stages of change, and in order to help people to shed these delusions, we need to intervene appropriately at each stage. Okay, so what are these stages? There are 5 stages of change, and we're only going to discuss the first 3 today. Pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. Roughly these translate as not ready to change, getting ready to change, and ready to change. The idea is to move somebody from one stage to the next, not to leap out to the final stage. The term pre-contemplative is a politically correct but helpful way of avoiding the negative term denial, which sounds permanent and unhelpful. The faithful are not in denial. They're pre-contemplative. They're not thinking about abandoning their faith until they meet us. They're contemplative. If someone is contemplative, they understand that there's a potential problem with their faith. Something just doesn't seem quite right about this. The goal is to meet people where they are and move them forward through the stages of change. In this sense, street epistemology offers hope. The faithful are not hopeless cases. They are pre-hope cases. Develop non-adversarial relationships. I say this strictly in the context of these little interventions, these communicative interactions, these communications that we have with people. The literature on education and behavioral change is crystal clear. People change their pathological beliefs from a point of view of safety. Well, how do we do that? Well, the first thing I do, and I'll give you examples at the end, the first thing I do is I set the right tone. The tone is not a tone of attack or aggression. We want a person to feel like this is a place where we can have a conversation. Again, we're meeting people where they are. We're creating a conversational space, a public space. It's a place on the street where we're being real. It's the adult table. To that end, this is not a hard and fast rule, but there are certain words that I use and there are certain words that I avoid. I use the words mutual, reciprocal, we, one. I avoid no, cannot, won't, I, me. For example, I'll say, how could one figure that out? If we, team, if we wanted to figure that out, what could we do? People don't feel attacked when you give a we. They do when you switch to you often. And when you switch to you, they'll invoke a defensive posture. And the likelihood that you'll help move them from one stage to the next will be greatly decreased. So you have to set the right tone, and you have to use the right words. The faithful have gone to great lengths to propound the angry atheist narrative. This must not bleed through in your interventions. Yes, we've been bullied, and yes, there are legitimate reasons for us to be angry, but even a hint of anger could compromise the entire intervention. Remember, we're fighting against millennia of dogmatic indoctrination, and these things take time. There's also a really interesting and equally disturbing line of literature called relationship evangelism. And the basic idea, this is put forth by Christians, is that people will come to Christ by the person who brings them to Christ, through these relationships. I've turned this literature on its head, and I've used these techniques in street epistemology in the same way that those relationships that you have with people can lead them to reason and away from superstition, pretending, faith, and religion. Number 3, reconceptualize. This has been very helpful to me, and there's a lot of literature on this. I conceptualize faith as a virus. The faithful are not well cognitively, and they need our help. They are, I'm very sincere when I say it, they are in a very real sense epistemic victims. They're victims of some specious, dangerous epistemology, way to come to knowledge. Our goal is to help them trade an unreliable epistemology for a reliable epistemology, an unreliable way to know the world to a reliable way to know the world. Just as I'm not upset with somebody who's caught a cold, so too I'm not upset with somebody who's caught the faith virus. It is an epistemological sickness. We need, everyone in this room, we need more compassion and more understanding when we try to help people move through these stages of change. This will also help conceptualizing faith as a virus to not develop adversarial relationships, relationships of conflict. 4, 5, and 6, my recommendations for strategies 4, 5, and 6 are prohibitions. God is a conclusion. It's a conclusion that one has as the result of an unreliable epistemology, as an unreliable way to come to knowledge, to form beliefs about what's real and what's in make-believe land. Dawkins has a scale on the God delusion, from 1 to 7, with 1 being absolute knowledge, and 7, well, absolute certainty, and 7 being no way, Jose, impossible. Dawkins places himself on the scale as a 6 in regard to belief in God. Do not target God in your interventions. One thing that will happen is people will become better at arguing. The other thing that will happen, people say to me, well, you know, Pete, if I could only move somebody 1 point on the Dawkins scale, you know, if I could only move them from, you know, a 1.4 to a 2.4. Yeah, okay, but the problem with that is you've kept the unreliable epistemology in place, so the belief-forming mechanism is still there. You need to address the symptom. You're addressing the symptom and not the underlying illness. The faith virus is the cause of the belief in God. Okay, an odd thing to say at this conference, but don't address religion. Address faith. It's much easier to help someone lose their faith or help someone abandon their faith than it is to separate them from their religion. Religion is bingo, it's singing songs, it's dating, it's friendship, it's barbecues. I love barbecues. We have barbecues at our house every summer. The problem is that these things are wedded to religion. These are good things. Don't attack a community. Don't alienate a person from meaningful relationships. Your interventions should target faith, not religion, not community, and not friendships. Also, by undermining faith, one is able to undermine almost all religions simultaneously. Faith is the foundation. Take away the foundation, and everything built upon it is severely compromised. I gave this its own slide because it's so important. Bringing up politics when conducting interventions sidetracks the discussion. The discussion should be about faith. Forget about Israel and God we trust on our money, Iran having nuclear weapons. Forget about it. Don't even think about it. These are seen as attacks on faith by proxy, and you're some kind of liberal who says, you know, I'm some kind of liberal. Bring it back to faith. How do you know that's true? Really, you're claiming to know something. How do you know that's true? Tell me, let's talk about that. Bringing facts into the discussion when someone is pre-contemplative, only pre-contemplative, the first stage of change, is the wrong way to conceptualize the problem. People do not dig themselves into cognitive sinkholes because they believe in the basis of evidence. They have these problems because they don't believe in the basis of evidence. If somebody believes the Earth is 6,000 years old, there's no data point, no piece of information that you can give them and say, oh, well, geez, well, you know, I thought the Earth was 6,000 years old, and now I've seen this piece of data, and I'm ready to change my mind. No, they're right, you're laughing because it's true. Don't bring facts into the discussion when people are pre-contemplative. I also hear, I teach science and pseudoscience at Portland State, I also hear, can't tell you how many times I've heard this, there is a conspiracy among scientists to suppress dissent about evolution. Evolution in biology, well, you know, it's not, okay, look, they're pre-contemplative. There's no data point, there's no fact that you can bring in to disabuse them of that notion. Instead, bring it back to epistemology. Facts. Bringing facts into discussion when someone is in the pre-contemplative stage will not help you to achieve your epistemological ambitions and set them on a path to reason and sincerity with regard to their own beliefs. The other problem with that is that conversations often devolve into what constitutes reliable evidence. That's a completely reasonable discussion, but not for those who are pre-contemplative. Okay. The problem then is with epistemologies people use and not with conclusions they hold. Problem is not that somebody claims that the Earth is 6,000 years old. That's a consequence of a failed way to come to knowledge. This is compounded by the fact, and we spoke about this at dinner, that in contemporary postmodern culture, people not only have their own views, but they think they're entitled to their own facts. We've all seen it in discussions where people don't just cherry-pick the facts about alternative medicine, for example, but actually make up data based on their feelings. I see this a lot with homeopathy, or alternative medicine in particular. Well, it works for me. It worked. Somebody would say it works for me. It's a big problem because they confuse the subjective with the objective. They confuse matters of taste, and they think that if something is a matter of taste, like a pizza topping, or we went on a hike. We talked about what we like. I like science fiction. I like heavy metal. These are matters of taste. They're not matters of fact. People confuse the subjective with the objective. People are entitled to their own facts, and that complicates these interventions. Well, my faith is true for me. Okay. Focus. Always focus these discussions on epistemology, on how people know. Do not let yourself become sidetracked. I have a prediction. I'm going to make a prediction. If you do this, if you follow this plan, I'll give you examples later, something is going to happen. People will say, well, it makes me feel good. It's beneficial for me. Hitler was an atheist. I hear that literally about once a day. People have to say that. They have to say that because they've abandoned the idea that faith is a reliable path to truth. The other thing you'll notice in your conversations is that there won't be a clear demarcation. Somebody won't say, oh, you know what, I was right. Faith isn't a reliable guide to truth, but it makes me feel good. My Uncle Bill plays bingo all the time. It's wonderful. He has a great community. Never happened. People won't explicitly acknowledge that. That's why you have to very gently bring them back of what, hey, I say, hey, we were having a great conversation about whether or not faith leads to truth, and then all of a sudden you start talking about Stalin. Where'd that come from? I'd like to continue this conversation. Divorce belief from morality. And we talked about this at breakfast with Dan. Dan's written some wonderful books, Preachers Who Are Not Believers, a little article he co-wrote, and Breaking the Spell. One of faith's defensive mechanisms is that any challenge to it is immoral. So it's really important, particularly in the ready stage of change, that we divorce faith from morality. People may be ready to change, but they're afraid that there will be moral implications of abandoning their faith. This also, by the way, relates to why you shouldn't bring facts into the discussion in those early stages, because it doesn't help to separate people from this belief that faith makes them a better person. Those who've caught the faith virus are grateful for their affliction because they think that their faith makes them a better person. They think that having faith makes them a moral person. Faith does not make you a better person. My lack of faith in Isis or Jesus or Apollo does not make me a bad person, nor does it make me a good person. Your faith, probably not you in this audience, but your faith in Isis or Jesus or Apollo does not make you a bad person or a good person. Faith does not make you a better person. Faith is an unreliable epistemology. It's an unreliable way to come to knowledge. Once we do this, once we make this shift in our thinking, then we're in the world of reason and argument. That's where we want to be, at the adult table. We want to bring our conversation partners with us to the adult table. We're going to sit down and we're going to figure this out. Tell me what you think, straight up. Let's talk about what you know, what you think you know, and how you know it. Short of this, back to the kids' table, back to make-believe land. Okay. Those were the 9 strategies that you can use, begin using to conduct your own epistemological interventions. Let's briefly review those. Meet people where they are. We talked about stages of change. The goal is to help move people from one stage of change right on down the line to the next stage. Develop non-adversarial relationships. We talked about the importance of tone. We talked about the importance of words. Reconceptualize faith as a virus. This will also help you in your interventions because you're less likely to become upset, irritated, frustrated, angry. Then we went over a series of suggested prohibitions. Target faith, not God. Target faith, not religion. Target faith, not politics. In the pre-contemplative stage, avoid facts. Always bring the focus back to epistemology. Interesting. How does someone know that? How could someone know that? And finally, divorce belief from morality. All right. Those were the 9 strategies. I'm going to leave with some final thoughts, and I'm going to walk you through some interventions. These conversations are opportunities for us to stop the spread of the faith virus. I look at every engagement I have as an opportunity. I want to fly. Frequently when I fly, I usually use Southwest. I sit in the middle chair. I do that because it increases the likelihood that someone will be reading a religious book, a Bible, a Quran. So let's take a look at what that intervention would look like. You sit down. They should always begin with sincerity, continue with sincerity, and end in sincerity. So I'll ask a question if I really want to know. If I don't want to know, I won't ask a question. If I want to know where someone's going, which is, general curiosity, I'll ask that question. If not, I'll ask another question. I'll ask somebody what I really am sincere about. So, okay, just briefly pause and say, so up till now I've only talked about chapter 4, but I'm going to throw in a lot of different techniques and I'm going to try to explain those as they come. So, where are you going? Oh yeah. I said, Miami. Okay, at that point, you've got that, you file it away. Don't parallel talk. Don't bring the conversation back to yourself. Don't say, oh, I have an aunt in Miami. That's not about you. It's about helping them. And it is. It really is. Okay, so you're in Miami? Oh, yeah, what are you going to do in Miami? Oh, I'm going to see my brother. Oh, that's great. What does he do down there? If you're interested. If you're not interested, don't ask the question. Oh, he's a banker, barber or whatever. It's about the same, beginning to be. Okay, that's great. So now what we've done is we've established rapport. Now we can begin the intervention. Oh, that's interesting. I see that you're reading a Bible. Yes, I am. And most people, in fact, I don't want to say everybody, because there might be an outlier, but virtually everybody will want to have that conversation with you. Oh, okay, right now. Now here's what we need to do. We need some diagnostic tools immediately so we know when we begin the intervention, we know where to target them. We know what questions to ask and how to help them immediately. Because remember, we're not talking about having them throw the Bible at 50,000 feet. I think we're moving to one stage. That's all we're doing. Here's a quick there are many diagnostic questions. Here's a quick question. Do you believe Jesus Christ walked on water? Well, yes, I do. How certain are you of that? What is your confidence value in that belief? Okay, 100%, 90, high 90s, they're pre-contemplative. Great. No facts. Now we know we're having a whole different discussion. Well, I'm 80%. Great. Okay. With the great, that means that they're contemplative. They're thinking about it. 60%. 60%. They're ready. They're ready. They're ready. And I truly did get the right seat on this flight. Okay, so now I know. Now we know how we're going to structure the intervention. So we immediately begin on epistemology. Immediately. Jesus Christ walked on water. How would someone, not you, someone, how would someone know that? If they're not me, to feel threatened. If I were to figure that out, what would I do? What could someone do? See, at this point, it's hard to give an example, but I'll just run with a few alternatives. They could say, well, you could pray about it. Say, well, it's in the Bible. Now, almost invariably I've found doing this literally every day for 25 years, hours and hours a day, there are only so many things people can say. Right? There's literally about 2 or 3, 4 things most people can say. At some point, if you keep the question on epistemology and don't talk about God's existence and don't talk about the fossil record of the age, if you actually do this, here's what someone will probably, 55% chance, end up saying at some point. I feel it in my heart. I feel it. I feel Christ's love washing over me. Okay. At this point, it's essential that you yes, you heard me correct, that you validate that experience. What you don't want to do, everyone is infallible in terms of their own experience. If I like cherry pie, I like cherry pie. You can't convince me that I don't like cherry pie. But what you can do is you can divorce or disassociate the feeling that people have from the cause of that feeling. Oh, okay. So you feel this in your heart, yes. Have you opened, almost invariably they'll also talk about you. Have you opened your heart to Jesus? Do you love the Lord? Has the Lord saved you? All right. So you have to think in your head. Sometimes I'll say this, this really isn't about me. I'm curious. If you're curious, then say you're curious. If you're not curious, don't say you're curious. Let's go back to this idea of how you know that. What do you think about people in different faith traditions when they feel something really strong? Like when they have really strong feelings? How is that possible? The idea is to get them to reflect on their own beliefs by asking them to think about someone else's beliefs. Again, they could say anything. Keep the conversation focused on epistemology. Keep it on how they know. Try to move them one stage. That's all you're trying to do. One stage. The other thing is, I wait until the plane is in the air. Because I got about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and we're there. But people really will want to discuss this with you. This is really, really important to a lot of people, and they'll want to have this discussion. And I encourage you to do so. The other thing that's really important in these, and I didn't say this in the talk, but I've stressed this in my work, is that you have to be genuinely willing to reconsider your beliefs. Every time I start these interventions, I always say, well, Jesus, maybe I'll get unbelievably lucky. Maybe someone is going to know something I don't know. I'm willing to reconsider. I'm genuinely willing. If someone knows something I don't know, I want to know what it is, because then I can know it too. But again, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. People flying to heaven on a winged horse. It's not deep. Talking serpents. Those are extraordinary claims. Those require extraordinary evidence. In even a short period of time, change is possible. In these micro-personal engagements that we have, these small slivers of time that we spend with people, parents' house, friends, strangers, these are all opportunities. If we help someone understand why the epistemology they hold is unreliable, that's hope. Now they're in a position to use reason to discern truth from falsity. Every single person has the opportunity to live a life free of delusion. Street epistemology facilitates that hope. There will never be another fourth horseman. Hitchens is dead. Instead of a replacement horseman, we can create millions of horsemen. You can help liberate people of the faith virus and enter a life of reason. Thank you. I kept it under 40 minutes so we could have some questions, and I'll be here all weekend, so if you want to practice some of these interventions, we can role play, we can go through the stages of change, we can talk about what somebody could say and how you could respond to that hypothetically. So I'll be around if people would like to do that. Hi, could you say your name when you come up, please?
My name is Ray, bless you. Ray, yeah. My mom is 90. I have a brother, and I have two brothers who died younger than me. And after they died, some time after, I asked her how she maintains her faith. And she just sort of said, well, I just do. Why should I try to disabuse her of that?
It's a good question. I lost my mom this year, and I never knew sorry, it's kind of hard to talk about. So I never really knew that my mom was religious. I don't think she was religious. She got hit by a series of horrible things. She had cancer and it spread, and she had heart conditions. She had diabetes. So, try to be brief in my response. So when she was in the hospital room, she asked my dad to bring her a figure of baby Jesus, which we had as kids. My mom was raised Catholic, and my dad did. My dad's an atheist. My dad brought that to her every day. And even though I think about this stuff all the time, I couldn't bring myself to help my mom out of that. You know, I mean, I couldn't do it. We don't have answers to things. You know, we're not pretending to know what happens to you after you die. And so I understand why people could be religious, and I do understand that there really is an allure of something that you can be with your loved ones, or you can, you know, see a brother or a family member who's died. I think that you have to make the decision about when it's appropriate for you to do it or not, or maybe even when you can. And I know that I couldn't do it as much as I do it. So I don't know if I can give you an answer to that question.
Right. I just think it would be an uncomfortable thing, and it's probably something that I shouldn't do.
Well, and especially when someone's on their deathbed, yeah. I mean, it's really hard.
Oh, she's not. She's fine.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Hi.
I'm JB.
JD?
It's JB, yeah. I was just curious if you could share a quick, I enjoyed the informal style here, but I'd like to hear a real-world example, maybe one time when things on an airplane or wherever went well for you, and maybe another time where it didn't go so well when you think you might have done differently.
Sure, I'll give you an example of when it went exceptionally well. Most of the time these things actually, you don't really know if they go well, because you don't know how to test them. But people will come up to you afterwards and say something, oh, I hated you, whatever you told me. So here's an example of when it went really well. So I was teaching a night class, and there was a security guard there. And he was about to go on a mission. He was a Mormon. And we had a few minutes, and I said, well, you know, what's your best line? You know, maybe it'll work on me, convince me I'll join the church. I thought about it, and he said, well, how did the universe get here? In fact, we just talked to Victor Stenger about this. How did the universe get here? And I said, well, what do you mean, how did it get here? He said, well, God had to have created the universe. And I said, well, what if the universe was always here? And he was flabbergasted at that. His jaw dropped. I mean, just think about that for a second. Here's a guy who's going to go out and convince people of some pretty radical silliness, right? And he had not thought of a simple objection. And so from there, that was, but again, I really do want to stress that that is the exception to that does not happen very often.
So this is a lottery where you got someone who was ready unexpectedly?
Say that again?
That was someone who was ready, you won the lottery on that guy?
Yeah, we won the power jackpot on that one. But there are other considerations too. I'll answer your question directly, but we need to help people once they do abandon their faith. And there are conferences like this, and there are community, I don't know, I'm not Canadian, but there are community resources. CFI is a wonderful resource in Portland. But more often than not, what will happen is that people's defensive posture will go up, they'll offer resistance to ideas, but you don't really know what's happening. For all you know, that could be part of the process that helps somebody. Dawkins is accused of being too strident. I don't think he's too strident at all. Oftentimes in communities, people never hear another voice. They never hear somebody stand up to them and say, well, wait a second, let's talk about that. How do you know that? That's also the problem with blasphemy laws, is that when people's beliefs aren't challenged, they increase the confidence values they have in those beliefs because they're not open, they've never even heard other ideas. So I would suggest if you want to start trying these techniques, the first thing you should do is you need to develop a style and a rapport which works for you. And then once you do that, you tend to only think that you see this series of failures. But again, you don't really know that. The only way to know that would be some kind of test, like a scientific test. But over time, you'll get good enough, and people will come to you. Again, think about that line of literature on relationship evangelism. So if you do this enough, there's nothing magical or secretive about it. If you do it enough, anything you do enough, as Malcolm Gladwell say 10,000 hours, you get good at it. You just have to tailor these discussions to your own personality style. Thanks.
Thank you.
Excuse my voice, it's sort of gone.
That's
but
fine.
my name's Sam
Nice to meet you.
Simpson, and just a short observation. I work with women with anti-violence field, and I found very interesting many of the things you had to say, because it's very similar to the way that we have to work often with women who, even though they may be in a shelter, are still pre-competent.
Right.
And they've just arrived there because of the exigencies of violence. So I think that I'm looking forward to reading the whole book, and
thanks.
I think it'll give me some tools for my job as well as proselytizing for atheism. But I was very interested to read in a little bio about your work with prisoners, and I was wondering if you could briefly give an example or two from that work.
Sure, and I've published extensively. I have a IRB or approval to bring a tape recorder into the prisons, and those conversations that I've had are available in print. I don't think they're behind firewalls, but I'm not sure. So one of the studies that I did in prisons, I wanted to help people desist from criminal behavior, and we talked about this last night. We don't talk about it in terms of recidivism, which is the number of people who go back, who come back in prison. We talk about it in terms of desistance. Did we help people desist? So one thing I didn't mention today is my principal treatment modality to help people abandon faith and enter reason is the Socratic method. That's basically a way of asking directed questions of people and seeing if they agree with themselves. So the people, and I say men because they're all men in my study, were not in there for minor offenses. And I use these dialectical tools, these conversations, to help them desist from crime. And very briefly, since you asked me the specifics of this one study that I conducted, so I had a pre-test, and there were questions like, if you find a wallet in the bathroom, what do you do? Another question was, if you walk in and you see your wife or partner sleeping with another man, what do you do? And questions would be like, well, answer, I'd kill him with a shoehorn. I said, I'd throw him out the window, I'd attack my wife, then they had the treatment, and then we post-tested them, and responses were like, I join in. So the responses were less reactive and more indicative of a desistance, which leads me to believe, even though it was a small feasibility study, that this method works. I'm also doing this at Oregon Health Science University with diabetics, and the idea is, can you ask people directed questions to help facilitate something in them so that they'll improve their treatment compliance? That is, they'll do what they want to, what their goal is. A very brief example of that. One man in the study said his goal is to walk 5 minutes a day. Okay, I live in Portland. Portland rains about 300 days a year. So in a traditional study, the way that these are conducted, oh, okay, 5 minutes a day, boom, boom. But what I said was, well, what are you going to do if it rains? So that's a counterexample. That's giving him an instance of something that calls that belief into question. And so a lot of the interventions with the faithful, depending on the stage, it totally depends upon the stage, you can offer counterexamples. Like, well, what if the universe always existed? Something like that. So I hope that answers your question. Hi.
Richard Carlson.
Hi, Richard.
I worry about, talking to some people. How do you determine whether or not they can handle losing their faith? I mean, in many ways, some, they're so deeply ingrained and so deeply invested in it mentally. But the other aspect of it is that they can be deeply invested in terms of the community. Their whole life revolves around. I mean,
it's a great question.
Family, and there's certain people that I worry about that in our discussions that, geez, I'm not sure I want to, but make them lose their faith at this point.
That's a great question. I don't like the term losing one's faith. I like the term, because when you lose something, you lose your keys. You usually want your keys back. Abandoning, I think, is better. It is never a bad thing to help somebody shed an unreliable epistemology. If somebody has a bad way of coming to knowledge, they believe that flipping coins, sacrificing chickens, it's never a bad thing to help disabuse them of that, to help them end that. But even beyond that, you're not just helping them to abandon something, you're filling that void with reason and rationality. And that's a whole nother talk. That's not just a 30-minute talk. That's a whole nother talk about how to help people value those things which lead them to align their beliefs with reality. So again, it's not a question of losing, it's a question of helping somebody have a method of coming to knowledge so that they can align their beliefs with what is actually true.
Yeah, I worry about people that you know that if you were to be successful, that they're going to be in for possibly years of difficulty, both within their families, their marriages, their in-laws, and their parents, and their employers.
No question.
All that. It's just,
no question. And that should never be sugar-coated to people.
Yeah. I tend to be cautious about it.
Here's one of the things I do. I didn't do this here because I didn't know anybody in Vancouver, and I certainly didn't anticipate doing any interventions with anyone here. But I carry in my wallet, I use a little clip. I carry the couple cards, and they have some basic numbers of people, community resources, support. The people who go to Humanists of Greater Portland. There are people who specialize. A very good friend of mine is a humanist minister, and he himself, it's always better, by the way, this is just parenthetical, it's always better when you refer people to resources, when you refer them to people who have been indoctrinated as well. All right, thank you. I love your show, by the way. I've been watching Continuum.
Thank you very well. Thank you very much. So it's William Davis, and my question is fairly straightforward. On the epistemology front, and when you ask them, well, Jesus walks on water, and why do you believe that, or how does one believe that?
Right.
One believes that because it's in the Bible, and the Bible is written by God. How do you move past
That's an awesome question. Okay, let's see how much time we have. Okay, so as long as you always center the conversation back to how you know that. For example, the Bible is written by God. Well, that's interesting. So remember, you're not saying no, because then the defensive posture goes, oh wow, really, that's really interesting. How do you know that? How do you know it's written by God? Well, and again, there really are only a few things someone can say. Most of the time it'll come back to some kind of revelation. Well, so, the whole talking serpent thing, is that, yes, God said it. Oh, that's really interesting. So here's one of the things I've been doing recently. I've been finding a very high degree of success, or higher than some other techniques I use. I love to talk about the Quran. So I'll say, do you think that Muhammad received revelations in the desert? Oh, definitely not. Sometimes someone will say yes. Then you need to switch your treatment modality, because then you have to switch the treatment modality. So okay. So can you help me understand? I don't understand why do you believe that God wrote this book, but we have a lot of people who really sincerely, in a heartfelt way, believe that He wrote this book? Well, how do you know that they're right and you're wrong? Well, I feel it in my heart. Okay, well, but help me understand here. See, help me understand here. Drop the defensive posture. Teach me. Because maybe they really do know something. Teach me. These people really feel strongly about this. They're misled. Oh. So what do you mean they're misled? So you're trying to trace a route so they can see if the same tools apply to themselves, right? But what you don't want to do ever is make that link explicit for them. They have to make that link explicit for themselves. They have to come to the conclusion, wow, geez, if a lot of Muslims believe this, it could be wrong, maybe I could be wrong. Here's another quick diagnostic tool that you can use. I love this. I use this all the time. It's one of my favorites. How could you be wrong? So people should be able to tell you how they could be wrong, not how they are, how they could be wrong about a particular belief. I gave a talk recently. I used the example of how many people believe there are aliens on other planets? How many people have 100% certainty, intelligent life, 100% certainty? Excellent. Well, then the trick doesn't work. So if someone were to say, well, I'm positive, the universe is too big. Well, how could you be wrong about that? Well, Carl Sagan gives the answer. I could be wrong because we could be the first. We could be the last. So even asking someone how they could be wrong is very helpful. Here's another question I use that's helpful in those examples. Well, God, how could you be wrong about that? Okay. So what would it take you to abandon your faith? What would it take you to not have this belief? Like, what set of conditions would hold? One of the things that you'll find is even asking someone that question will create a cognitive space in which they can then, it's like taking one of those, in a brick wall with grout. It's like taking one of those things and just chipping away at the grout at the base. Even asking that question will create cognitive spaces of openness. So to answer your question, there's an arsenal, there's an array of tools and strategies that you can bring once somebody says to you it's the Word of God. Basically, the bottom line of the whole thing is undermine how they claim to know that. Even if you bring them down a few points in their confidence level simply through these questions, asking them in very directed ways about specific things, you'll find a difference. And we can run through scenarios if you'd like later. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi there. My name is Michael Prestwich.
Hi, Michael.
Quick question for you. How would you go about approaching the self-defined postmodernist person of faith or postmodern Christian?
That's a great question. So entailed within this question is this idea that everybody has their own truth. I don't want to, is that correct?
Yeah, essentially it, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it takes about 10 minutes to disabuse people of this idea, and I have a chart in my book that absolutely everything you need to walk through this. So I'll see if I can run through it in 2 minutes. How much time do I have, Bill?
3 minutes.
All right, see if I can do it in a minute and a half. Is it possible that some people are wrong? Notice the use of the word possible. Is it possible? Everybody will say yes. Okay. Are people actually wrong? Can somebody actually be wrong about something? Virtually everybody will say yes. If not, they have a different kind of cognitive malady. You have to go back and repave the whole cognitive framework. Okay. So we know that some people are actually wrong. Does increasing the number of people who have a false belief increase the likelihood that it's true? Now, it veers off. They say yes or no. If they say yes, well, then you give a specific concrete example. Well, if I think there's an alien in the courtyard, and I got Bill over here who's completely convinced there's an alien right outside in the courtyard, and then we bring a couple of these people in the front row, they look like they're in on it too. Yeah, so we have now 7 people who believe there's an alien in the courtyard. Does that increase the likelihood that there's an alien in the courtyard? No. Okay. So increasing the number of people who believe something does not increase the likelihood that it's true. Is that correct? That's correct. Okay. So that's the foundation. So now we've established that there are truth or falsity, that people can be wrong. The only thing that remains to be established is who's wrong. That's it. And that's a question of epistemology. That's unbelievably easy to use to figure out if you use the tools we've talked about, and if you always bring it back to how people know. There are certain ways, processes of thinking that will not lead you to the truth. Flipping coins, goats, sacrifice, those are 2 examples. Faith is another one. We have to put faith in the same category as an unreliable method to come to knowledge. That's the linchpin of this whole thing. Yeah, hi.
Let's say you are known well by your family and your friends as the angry atheist.
I'm deaf in one ear. Could you speak up one more time?
Sure. Let's say you're known as the angry atheist by your family and friends. How do you reopen the dialogue?
How do you what the dialogue?
Reopen the dialogue.
Oh, okay. You're not talking about anybody you know.
Brothers, sisters, good friends, people that you've tried to, that haven't been ready. You've been fighting them, and now we want to reopen the dialogue in this manner.
That's a great question. So remember, every time you create a conflict or an adversarial relationship, you further entrench somebody in those delusions. So once the relationship is already established, then it's very, very difficult to dig out of it. There's no quick answer I can give you. On a plane, a stranger, at a bar, or what have you, the guy or the woman who does my shades. Just parenthetically, by the way, some faiths are very hard, much harder than others. Jehovah's Witnesses, I found my success rate with Jehovah's Witnesses is pretty low. So there's no easy answer I can give to that question because it takes place within the context of a relationship in a larger milieu. And so how does one do that? I don't know. I don't have the tools. I'm not privy to those interactions. My thinking would be that if you manifested that you weren't angry and you try to work on other aspects of the relationship without talking about faith and then establish that as a base. And that's why I devoted a whole 2 slides to this idea of the angry atheist narrative. It is absolutely essential. And when someone says you're just angry because you don't love God, you're just angry because God, you don't... Here's what I would say. What do you mean by that? I don't really understand. Now, it is harder, admittedly, if you're a homosexual and you've been... I mean, if you have some condition in your life when you have bona fide, legitimate reason to be pissed off, yeah, sure, that's going to be for sure harder. But here's what I would do. I would not talk about it. I would try to work on your relationship and other aspects of your life, and then I would engage them in a discussion. And if they do say that you're angry, say, no, I'm not really angry. I'm really just trying to understand how you know that. I'm really not angry, but I just don't understand how you can know that. And then you have to begin the intervention. But again, with family, in these entrenched relationships, it's more complicated because you have a life history that moves into it. And also remember that maybe their reaction to you is because they themselves are contemplative, and they're thinking there's a problem. Nietzsche talks about that the people who are slaves or on the bottom of the pyramid, they get great joy from discharging their rage and anger on people beneath them. So maybe they're just acting out. Maybe it's just verbal behavior and they need to do that. You just never know. It's tricky to know. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it very much.